Hello friends, it is indeed my pleasure to welcome all of you to our discussion today on the constitutional system of America. In this lecture, we shall focus on the significant features of the American Federation and also evaluate their role in their influence of the governmental structure that has grown up in the American Federation to a significant extent. We shall begin our discussion today by referring to a comment made by Bryce when he rightly said that after all the deductions, the American Constitution ranks much higher than any other written constitution of the world, primarily for the intrinsic excellence of its scheme, the simplicity and precision of its language, adaptation to the circumstances of the people, and its judicious mixture of definiteness in principles and elasticity in details. In this context, it needs to be mentioned that the US Constitution has proved to be a remarkably stable document. The Constitution was adopted at the Philadelphia Convention in 1787. It is unique in many respects. Not only it is one of the briefest constitutions and a written constitution which consists of 7 articles and 26 amendments, but also presents a classic example of a federal model and a presidential form of government. The system of separation of powers advocated by Montesquieu is successfully in operation in USA in combination with the system of checks and balances that we find from the working of the US Constitution. It is worth mentioning in this respect that the judiciary occupies a vital position in the American system. It accepts judicial review and is known not only as the guardian but also as the interpreter of the American Constitution. It is one of the greatest federations in the world and offers a perfect example of a liberal democratic model functioning on the basis of, as we mentioned earlier, on the presidential system of government. Against this background, the attempt of the present lecture today is to focus on the significant features of the US Constitution briefly in order to highlight the significance of these principles in practice and analyze the impact of these principles in shaping the structure of government with reference to the 3 organs of government, that is the executive, the legislature, and the judiciary. Following are some of the basic significant features of the American Constitution which have been listed below. And we find that the first feature of the American Constitution is that it is one of the briefest written constitutions of the world. The US Constitution is a brief document with, as we mentioned, 7 articles and 26 amendments so far. It was a model of draftsmanship which reflected the wisdom of the forefathers. It provided for an indirect method of election of the president, which, however, over time has now become a direct one. The second feature of the American Constitution is the element of rigidity. The US Constitution, in fact, is extremely rigid and it can be amended only by a very lengthy, cumbersome method which can practically take a long number of years. The US Constitution also represents a federation, and the federal character is represented by the fact that the Constitution is a federation of 50 states at present. The Constitution enumerates the powers of the center and leaves the residue of powers to the states. The founding fathers, in fact, established a dual system of government, a national government government and a state government equipped with residuary powers. However, in reality, we find that the federal center has become powerful primarily due to the application and adoption of what we call the doctrine of implied powers. The next feature of the US Constitution is the supremacy of the Constitution. The Constitution undoubtedly is the supreme law of the land, and neither the state or the center can override it in any way. We come next to the doctrine of separation of powers, which is a very vital feature and very important from the point of view of the working of the American Federation. The US Constitution is based on the working of the separation of powers, though no direct statement has been made on it. Despite the fact that for the purpose of close coordination and good governance, the three organs are interdependent and often at times cannot be separated, yet an attempt was made by the framers and the forefathers of the American Constitution to separate the three organs as far as possible. In this context, it needs to be mentioned that the Congress is the legislative organ, while the President is the head of the state and who is indirectly elected by the people, as well as he is elected for a period of 4 years and is not a member of the Congress and cannot be removed by a no confidence motion before the expiry of his term. He cannot dissolve the Congress, nor can he participate, unlike in the case of the Constitution of UK, in the deliberations and debates of the Congress. Both are independent of each other. The Supreme Court of USA heads the federal judiciary and enjoys complete freedom in its work because judicial supremacy is recognized by the Constitution of USA. However, separation of powers in USA is limited to some extent since the President controls the legislative policy, which was established primarily during the period of Roosevelt. It ensures coordination between the executive and the legislative branches of the government. Despite the coordination and despite the need to make the three organs interdependent, however, the principle of separation of powers is in operation, which led Feiner to comment that the American Constitution can be considered today to be the most important polity and can be cited as an example where the principle of separation of powers can be said to be in operation to the best possible extent. We shall now refer to the next feature of the American Constitution, which is the principle of checks and balances. Recognizing the importance of close coordination between the three organs of the government, the forefathers of the Constitution introduced the principle of checks and balances. The powers of an organ were so devised as to check the powers of the other. For example, the President of America has the power to veto the bills passed by the Congress, or the Senate shares the power with the President of America for making appointments to various federal offices and conclude treaties with the states. Through such measures, in fact, the Senate controls the internal and the external powers of the President to a large extent. The organization of judiciary is controlled and determined by the Congress, and the judges of the Supreme Court are appointed by the President with the consent of the Senate. The Supreme Court can declare the laws passed by the Congress and the executive action of the President, if required, ultra vires at times. Through this principle of checks and balances, the three organs of the government have been successfully kept in an interchecked and interlocked position. Ogg successfully remarks that no feature of the American Constitution is more characteristic and more significant than the principle of separation of powers combined with the principle of checks and balances. The next feature of the American Constitution to which we should refer to is the Bill of Rights. The Constitution contains certain fundamental rights for the citizens enacted by a number of amendments effected after the Constitution was promulgated. They were not included in the original draft of the Constitution in any way, and these rights can only be modified or suspended or except by a constitutional amendment. They cannot be modified or suspended. Important among these fundamental rights are freedom of speech or worship, which are ensured to the Americans. The next important feature, which is perhaps a very important feature of the American Federation, is the practice of judicial review. The Supreme Court and the federal lower courts have the power of judicial review of the legislative enactments in America. The federal judiciary can declare any law null and void if it is found to be inconsistent with the provisions of the Constitution. The supremacy of the judiciary over the executive and the legislature in fact had led to the remark that the government of USA is to a large extent governed by the judges, and the US Constitution in fact is what the judges make it. Critics describe the Supreme Court as a third chamber and the power of judicial review, its judicial veto. The next feature of the American Constitution is that of republicanism, that is unlike the Constitution of UK. The American Constitution is a republic which is headed by a president as an elected head of the state. The Constitution derives all its authority from the people. USA also has a presidential type of government which we have mentioned before, and according to it, despite the president being extremely powerful and being the head of the state and head of the government, he is not constitutionally responsible to the Congress in the manner in which the executive is responsible to the legislature in England or even in India. He neither attends the sessions nor initiates the legislations or has the power to dissolve the Congress. The member of his cabinet, in fact, are his personal assistants and not the members of the Congress in any way. Ogg, in fact, describes the president to be practically the foremost ruler in the world. Unlike the Constitution of UK and India, however, the president is the real executive head rather than a titular one. Although the Constitution provides for an indirect method of election by which he is elected by an electoral college consisting of as many as presidential electors as is the number in both houses of the Congress, we find that over time, although the Constitution prescribes a system of indirect election, over time the pattern of election has become a direct one, primarily brought about by the political parties in America. The Constitution of America believes in having dual citizenship. That is, an American is a citizen of both the USA as well as a citizen of the state where he is domiciled. Popular sovereignty continues to be another feature of the American Constitution, and we find that it is a very vitally guaranteed provision of the American Constitution. The spoils system also remains a vital feature of the American Constitution, although it has been criticized on the ground of leading to corruption and inefficiency at times. The next feature of the American Constitution is that it has a bicameral legislature like UK. The lower house is termed the House of Representatives, while the upper house is called the Senate. An interesting feature of the American legislature is that unlike many other legislatures of the world, the upper house is considered to be, that is the Senate, as the most powerful upper house chamber in the world. In fact, that the Senate, unlike the British House of Lords, is the most powerful upper chamber and is equipped with legislative, executive and judicial powers. Its tenure is 6 years, and unlike the lower house, whose tenure is for a period of 2 years. It is a compact house consisting of practically 100 members, while the lower house, that is the House of Representatives, has a total number of 435 members. Article 1 of the American Constitution, in fact, precedes the use of the word Senate over the House of Representatives, showing the vitality, the importance and the significance and the power of the Senate as a house and a part of the American legislature. The first article in fact states that all legislative powers shall be vested in a Congress of the United States, which shall consist of a Senate and a House of Representatives. The American Constitution, in fact, is extremely unique, and it presents a constitutional model very different from that of UK and many other parliamentary systems of the world. Its stability and strength and its great power status, in fact, at the present juncture, is a source of envy of many world constitutions. The bicameral legislative structure, in fact, was adopted by America to prevent despotism by either of the houses. We now come to the growth of the US Constitution, and we find that the original Constitution of the United States of America included 7 articles as embodied in the general principles of the framework of the federal government. But the present constitution is quite different and has expanded and enlarged from the original document prepared by the Philadelphia Convention. Today, at this juncture, it includes many new rules, regulations, judicial interpretations, and conventions which has affected the distribution and exercise of sovereign powers of the state. Several factors have contributed to the growth of the American Constitution, among which the issue of amendments is particularly important. Until now, more than practically 26 amendments have been passed so far. Laws passed by the Congress have also played a dominating role in the growth of the Constitution. Judicial interpretation or judicial decisions have also played a vital role in the development of the Constitution to a significant extent. Another factor which has played a vital role in the development of the American Constitution is the role played by the executive. Some powerful presidents of the USA have contributed a lot to the growth of the American Constitution, and in this context, special mention must be made of President Washington, Roosevelt, Jackson, and Lincoln, who have from time to time molded and developed the Constitution by a vigorous use of presidential powers. Along with the role played by the presidents, we find conventions have also played a vital role in the growth of the British Constitution, and not only in the British Constitution but also in the case of America, we find that conventions have played a predominant role. A focus on the governmental structure of USA reveals that America represents a classical example of a federal structure combined with a perhaps perfect model of presidential system at work, which is based on the principle of separation of powers and checks and balances. It has successfully adopted a liberal democratic model and is considered to be the most successfully functioning democracies of the world. We now touch upon the three organs of the government, and we find that first, by referring to the executive organ, we refer to a comment made by Lasky, who said that the position of the American president is no more or less than the British king on the one hand, as well as that of the British prime minister on the other. The American president is the head of the government as well as the head of the state. He is the nation's principal spokesman as regards the conduct of domestic and foreign policy. He is best compared to the prime ministers of parliamentary democracies. He also enjoys the power of making appointments to federal services. He enjoys legislative powers but does not possess the power to summon, prorogue, or dissolve the Congress, unlike the British Prime Minister. The President, unlike the British PM, is not a leader of the majority party in Parliament. He cannot sit and participate in the deliberations of the Congress, or neither can he participate in the debates that take place in the Congress. However, over time, he has acquired a substantial share in administration, and in this context, we find Feiner rightly comments that the executive should be made more important with regards to matters of legislation, and he tried to modify the idea of separation of powers. He has become an active legislative leader and an executive official. The veto power, in fact, in this context can be said to be the vital legislative power that is enjoyed by the president, that is, bills passed by the Congress requires the approval by the president. The president also has the power to make treaties. The position of the vice president is elected on the same ticket as the president for a term of 4 years, and he also forms a part of the executive and is described, however, as a heartbreak away from the president. Despite the executive branch being headed by the president, the day-to-day administration and enforcement of federal laws in USA is in the hands of a number of federal executive departments which have been created by the Congress to deal with specific areas of national and international affairs. The heads of the departments are chosen by the president and approved with the advice and consent of the Senate. They generally form a council of advisors of the President of the American Federation, which is generally known as the Cabinet. But the Cabinet in the American Federation is different from that of the Cabinet in the British sense. We now come to the next organ of the government, that is the legislature. We have already mentioned that America has a bicameral legislative structure, and the legislative work is done in the houses of the Congress, that is by the lower house represented by the House of Representatives, and the upper house, that which is represented by the Senate. We have also mentioned that the Senate is the most powerful upper house in the world, and despite the founding fathers who wished to make the House of Representatives, that is the lower house, a politically dominant entity in the political system of America, the Senate finally successfully emerged as the most powerful body. The House of Representatives serves more as a debating body in the legislature. We now come to the third and the most important organ of the American Federation, and that is the judiciary. The Supreme Court is the highest court of appeal in America and deals with matters primarily pertaining to federal government as well as disputes between states and matters related to the interpretation of the Constitution. It can declare any law or executive action null and void, besides exercising original and appellate jurisdiction, as well as acting as a court of record, as well as an interpreter of the US Constitution, as well as a protector of the rights of the citizens of the Federation. Another vital function of the judiciary in America is that of the power of judicial review, which is guaranteed by Article 3 and 4 of the American Constitution. Judicial review is a supreme power of the US Supreme Court to interpret the Constitution and the constitutional basis of laws if it is found to be inconsistent with the provisions that are there in the Constitution. The Supreme Court used the power of judicial review for the first time in 1803 in the case of Marbury versus Madison, and judicial review we find that exists in a predominant form in America, which leads to the judiciary being considered as the supreme organ of government in the American Federation. Judicial review, unlike and like in America, is also existing in other countries and like Japan and France to a significant extent, along with Germany. DeMock in fact says that the Supreme Court of USA invalidates or has the power to invalidate an act of the Congress or of a state legislature on the ground that it is not in conformity with the constitutional powers and provisions. It is exercising its power of judicial review. The power of judicial review, in fact, over the years is becoming extremely important and vital, although at times it creates a tussle of power and disturbs the balance of power between the three organs of the government in various countries, although it is successfully in operation in America till now. In conclusion, it can be said that the American system of government has successfully provided us with a federal form of government, a successful presidential system of government. It has also taught that it functions successfully on the basis of the principle of separation of powers, along with a combination of checks and balances. It has led to the influence and has influenced the development of governmental institutions in other liberal democracies of the world. It functions successfully as one of the greatest powers in the world on the basis of a liberal democratic model. Thank you.